The wind cut hard through the bone-pale town of Demerick, Wyoming. March brought nothing but a brittle sky and the kind of cold that hollowed out lungs. The railroad coughed a final breath as the eastbound train jerked to a stop, wheels hissing like a snake dying slow. No one disembarked but one woman, small and badly dressed, who stepped down with the uncertainty of someone not expected, not wanted, and maybe not real. Her shoes were city-bought but ragged. Her hands clutched a valise stitched from paperboard and prayer. Her face was sharp-boned, pale, streaked with grime and defiance. Her name was Miriam Knott. No one met her. The station master didn't look up from his ledger. A boy sweeping the platform sneered and kept his eyes on the broom. By the time the train screamed back to life and shrank into the horizon, Miriam was still there, chin high, as if standing upright were her last available defense against the world. At that same hour, Boone Mercier returned from burying a foal. The mare had survived, though barely, and Boone's hands stank of afterbirth and dirt. He had not spoken to a living soul in 3 days. He had not laughed in 6 months, not since Clara died in childbirth, leaving him a house full of silence and no child at all. Boone hadn't meant to go to the station. But something about the weather, the way it moved like a warning across the plains, stirred a tension in his ribs. He told himself he wanted to check the mail. That was a lie. When he arrived, there she stood, Miriam Knott. Skin pale with hunger, mouth pressed tight, eyes surveying the empty stretch of street as if calculating its cruelty. Boone stopped his horse but said nothing. She turned to look at him once, not with pleading, not even with hope, but with readiness, like she expected violence or something colder. "You waiting on someone?" he asked. "No," she said. Boone dismounted. "You been left." "I was promised a job," she answered. "Schoolhouse here. They wired. I wired back. The principal wrote me himself." He nodded slow. There hadn't been a working schoolmaster in Demerick since last fall when the last one ran off with a rancher's wife, and both were found drowned in Horseshoe Creek. No one had filled the post since. The town council was in disarray. Kids were raised with hard hands and pasture chores. No one much cared to pay a salary to a woman with books. "They changed their minds," Boone said. "They didn't tell me that." "They wouldn't." The wind rose again, bringing dust and the faint stench of manure. Miriam wrapped her coat tighter, but the coat was too thin, the fabric worn nearly sheer at the elbows. Boone studied her a long moment. She didn't fidget, didn't beg, just waited. "You got somewhere to go?" he asked. She looked out past the water tower toward nothing. "No." Boone lifted his chin toward the station master, who stood inside with a finger in one ear, pretending not to watch. Boone turned back to her. "You need food." "Yes." "You'll die out here if you stay." "I know that." Boone Mercier's eyes were the color of pine bark soaked in rain. When he finally spoke again, it was quieter than before. "Marry me, then." She blinked. "You drunk?" "No." "Are you simple?" "No." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell blood and hay on him. He took off his hat. His hair was too long, uneven. He was 37, a widower, tall and brutal in the way that came from honest labor. He wore loss like a second skin, but he spoke plainly. "I got land, got cattle, no family, you need a roof. I need a woman who won't die on me." She searched his face for mockery and found none. "Right now. Right now." She stared at him a long time, the silence between them growing thick. Then she said, "All right." They wed inside the station office before a witness and a ledger. The station master offered a grudging signature, and Boone signed next, his hand trembling only once. Miriam signed last. Her penmanship was tight and deliberate, as if every letter held a vow. By sundown, she sat behind Boone on his horse, riding out past the edge of town toward land as dry as bone and a house that had not known warmth in half a year. She did not cry. He did not speak. The wind rose behind them, scattering their trail. Nothing about it was romantic, but something in the dust held teeth, and something in the way she sat with her back straight told the land this. She had come too far to be buried quiet. They crossed the fence line by twilight, two strangers bound by necessity, hunger, and silence, their shadows long and sharpening. The ranch gates creaked shut behind them. It began with that. The Mercier homestead stood low against the prairie like it didn't want to be noticed. Plankwood grayed with age, roof patched with tin and desperation, and a Linta shed collapsing like a drunk praying for death. The corral was half-mended, and two cows stared dumbly at the newcomers, the whites of their eyes pink from dust. Miriam slid off the horse before Boone could offer help. Her legs nearly buckled, but she didn't let them. She looked around, memorizing the shape of things. No trees, no neighbors, the nearest house a smear of shadow across 5 miles of brittle land. She could feel the aloneness in her throat. "You got tools?" she asked. Boone nodded. "I'll need a saw." That shed a grave. He paused, then led the horse toward the barn without replying. She followed at a distance. There was no welcome inside the house. The air was thick with the mold of disuse, the cloy of old grief. His wife's apron still hung on a nail behind the door. There were boot tracks in the dust leading nowhere. He caught her staring. "I ain't touched it much," he said. "I can see that." That night he cooked beans and stale biscuits over the stove. Miriam set the table with slow hands, moving a cracked plate and 2 tin cups like a ritual she half remembered. She didn't ask about his wife. He didn't ask what city she came from. They ate in silence until Boone said, "Were you always a teacher?" She chewed her beans carefully. "No, before that I was a child, after that a seamstress, a woman's maid, then I taught, I was good at it, still am." "You run from something." "No, nothing left to run from." "You." I buried her out past the willows. The ones that died 2 winters ago, left the marker, though. "Good of you." He looked at her in the low firelight. She wasn't beautiful in any convenient way. Her cheeks were hollow, her lips chapped. But there was something inside her that didn't flicker, something that hadn't yet been broken. He couldn't name it, but he recognized it like a man knows the sound of a rattler in dry grass. They slept in separate rooms. She took the one with the broken window and repaired it by morning using oilcloth and nails dulled by rust. Boone noticed but said nothing. By the end of the first week, Miriam had slaughtered a chicken, mended the fence behind the barn, and burned his dead wife's linens. She told Boone plainly, "There's no haunting here, just rot. If you want a ghost, hang a portrait." Boone said nothing. He spent most of his days in the fields, fixing troughs, checking the far pastures, mending the north fence where coyotes had chewed through. Miriam kept to the house, but not as a housewife. She scrubbed the walls, bleached the floors, tore down the old curtains, and repurposed them into work aprons. She claimed the root cellar as her domain and began counting stores with the eye of a quartermaster. One day Boone came in early. His hands were raw from barbed wire, his knuckles split. She was in the kitchen, sharpening a knife with long, deliberate pulls. The sound carried through the room like a warning. "You aiming to kill something?" he asked. "I aim to be ready," she said. They stood there, neither moving. The wind rattled the window. Outside, a hawk screamed once. Boone sat slowly, setting his bloody hands on the table. Miriam wrapped them in a clean cloth. She didn't ask how it happened. He didn't explain. They sat like that for a long while, the cloth turning from white to red, the silence dense with things that didn't need saying. By late April, the rains came. It wasn't much, just a slant of water across the dust, but it turned the ground slick and the cattle restless. Boone lost 2 calves in the muck and came home soaked, furious, not at her, but at the land, the fate, the relentlessness of toil. She was waiting with coffee so strong it bit the tongue. He drank it without thanks. That night she came into his room without knocking. He sat up slow, eyes watching her the way a man watches a storm crawl over the horizon. "I'm not here for comfort," she said. "Why then?" "Because we married, because I said yes. Because I'm tired of pretending the past holds any power over the now." She stood still, waiting. Boone reached for her hand. She let him. What passed between them wasn't tender. It was work like everything else. It was survival laid bare, 2 people sharing heat against the brutal cold of memory. They didn't kiss. They didn't speak. And when she left before dawn, she left nothing behind but a line drawn in her own mind. No more rooms alone. By the time spring cracked fully open, Miriam was known across the county. She took in neighbor children 3 afternoons a week, taught them letters and sums at the long table she'd cleared of everything but chalk and paper. She charged in bread, in eggs, in favors. One boy's mother sewed her a dress. Another's father fixed the barn door. Word got out. There was a woman at the Mercier place and she didn't scare easy. Boone said little about it, but sometimes he stood in the doorway and watched the children file in, cheeks red, boots muddy, eyes wide. And Miriam, firm and unrelenting, teaching like it might save them. One afternoon a boy stayed late, slim, eyes too serious. "You're not from here," he said. "No," she said. "Why'd you come?" "I was left." "Why'd he marry you?" Miriam looked out the window. Boone was hauling feed, his shoulders heavy under the sun. "Because I was starving," she said, "and he was dying. We kept each other from finishing the job." The boy nodded solemnly and said nothing more. By the time the boy's mother came to collect him, the sun had dropped. Miriam stood in the doorway as they rode off, watching dust rise under the hooves. When she turned back, Boone was behind her. "You don't owe them this," he said. "I don't do it for them." That night he touched her shoulder as he passed behind her chair. Just a moment, just enough. And something inside her, quiet and long buried, shifted like an animal waking to the scent of warmth. By summer the prairie cracked. Wind carved through dry grass like a blade. The creek behind the Mercier house shrank to a thread, and what water was left tasted of iron and rot. The cattle grew restless. Boone woke twice to find a heifer trying to kick through the fence, maddened by thirst. Miriam hauled water in buckets from the well before dawn, arms bruised from the rope. She didn't complain. One morning, Boone found her collapsed beside the porch, bucket still full beside her. He knelt, pressing a hand to her cheek. Fever clung to her skin. "Get up," he said, voice too tight. She stirred but didn't open her eyes. "I'm fine." "You're not." "I just stood up too fast." He lifted her, awkward with it, carried her inside like she weighed nothing. She stirred again when he laid her on the bed and muttered something about vinegar. He didn't know what she meant, so he stayed by her side and watched sweat collect on her neck like pearls. By evening she could sit up. Her lips were cracked. Boone brought her weak broth, and she sipped it without a word. "You overdo things," he said. "I've done more with less." "You don't have to prove anything here." "I'm not proving," she said. "I'm enduring." She slept 2 days. Boone tended to the ranch alone, cursing every chore she'd taken from him. When she rose again, she was pale and silent, but her eyes were sharp. That night, she took his hand and held it so long he thought she might be breaking. The rains came too late. By August, Boone lost 3 more cattle. The well dipped low. Miriam planted nothing in the garden. What few carrots she coaxed from the ground came up thin and bitter. Children stopped coming for lessons. Their fathers needed them for work, and the mothers could no longer pay in goods. Miriam didn't ask why. She only nodded when Boone told her, but something inside her shifted. She began writing letters. She sent one to the mayor of Demerick, two to men in Cheyenne. She asked for books, for chalk, for slates and nails. When no reply came, she rode into town herself, alone, dressed in her best, the same brown dress the neighbor's wife had sewn for her, now mended twice. She returned with a black eye and a split lip. Boone was mending tack when she stepped down from the saddle. He looked up, froze. What happened? They said I should mind my place. He moved toward her. She didn't flinch. You hit back? He asked. No. Why not? They'd win. She walked past him into the house. He stared at her retreating figure a long time, hands curling slow. That night he oiled his rifle. Weeks passed. She healed. Her letters continued. One afternoon, a parcel arrived from Cheyenne, slates, chalk, 2 primers, and a note signed by a Reverend Crane. Boone read it aloud, stumbling through the penmanship. Miriam folded it afterward, slid it into the cracked Bible on the mantel, and said only, "It's a start." The children returned, not all but enough. She taught again, this time from the barn, sitting on upturned crates. Boone watched from the window. Sometimes he sat close enough to hear her read, voice low, sharp with purpose. She changed things. Slowly, but she did. One afternoon, Boone came back early from checking the southern field. Found a stranger on the porch, leaning too easy against the post. Young man, clean shirt, sharp mouth. Miriam stood in the doorway, stiff as iron. Boone didn't ask, he walked up slow. You lost. The man turned, didn't step back. She invited me, he said. I'm her cousin. That right? Boone looked at Miriam. She didn't blink. He's lying. Boone's face didn't change. You should go. The man smirked. You always speak for her. Boone stepped closer. No, he said. I bury things. The man laughed but backed off, mounted his horse, rode out with dust trailing behind. Inside, Boone poured a drink. Miriam didn't thank him. You know him? He asked. I used to. He hurt you. He would've. Boone didn't press. That night they sat outside as the sky turned copper and the wind smelled faintly of frost. She leaned into him, head on his shoulder. It was the first time she let her weight fall against him without holding part of it back. Winter came sudden. The snow was late, but when it arrived, it buried the house in a single night. They were ready. Miriam had canned near everything that grew, and Boone had traded for salt pork and coffee. They closed off half the house, huddled near the stove. The cold crept in anyway. Sometimes they spoke of nothing. Sometimes they told stories neither had told before. I had a sister, Boone said one night, voice flat. She drowned when we were kids. I never told Clara. Miriam stirred the stew. Why not? Didn't want her to think I'd failed her too. Miriam ladled broth into bowls. You didn't fail her. Boone didn't reply. The wind shrieked outside, as if it disagreed. Later, Miriam said, my father used to lock me in the cupboard if I used too many words. Boone looked up. I guess I learned to speak well so I could speak fast. He reached for her hand. She let him. That winter passed hard. A coyote got into the henhouse. Boone shot it. Miriam skinned it, hung the pelt near the porch to dry. Neither of them wasted anything. One night he found her weeping in the pantry, hands clenched around a jar of apricots. She didn't explain, and he didn't ask. He just knelt beside her until the weeping stopped. When spring cracked open the world again, something was different. They weren't strangers anymore. Not husband and wife, not really, not in the soft ways, but something deeper, something harder to name. A tether forged not from affection, but from the hard fact of survival shared. And when Boone took her hand in the garden one morning, after the frost lifted and green pushed stubborn from the soil, she held it like a weapon. Like something sharp she'd earned. Boone watched the land like it might betray him. He'd grown used to losses, first Clara, then cattle, then time, but now he watched with the wary attention of a man who'd been given one last fragile chance. Spring came uncertain, patchy with hail and sudden wind, but the grass turned green and the calves lived. That was more than luck, that was stubbornness rewarded. Miriam walked the property at dawn each day, a habit now. She carried a ledger and wrote in it constantly, not just inventories or lesson plans, but things Boone didn't ask about. He caught glimpses once, a line about sunstroke, another about a child's stutter, a drawing of the creek as it looked in flood. These weren't lists, they were records, proof that the world had happened and she'd been watching. The schoolchildren multiplied. Word had spread to the outer farms. Some rode in from 12, even 15 miles away. They brought biscuits wrapped in handkerchiefs, jars of preserved peaches, sometimes nothing at all. Miriam never turned them away. She kept a firm hand. Boone once overheard her tell a boy, "The world don't need you clever, it needs you stubborn. If you're lucky, you get to be both." By summer, the townsfolk started to notice. A man from the Demerick Council rode out in a lacquered buggy, boots polished too clean for real work. He sat stiff on their porch, hat in his hands. Boone didn't shake his hand. Miriam didn't offer coffee. "We'd like to make it official," the man said. "Schoolmistress of the Demerick district, a wage, a real post." Miriam didn't answer. She stared past him at the prairie, where children were chasing a paper hoop between fence posts. "And what would you give me for the ones who can't pay?" she asked. "Nothing," he said. "It's not about charity." "Then I'm not your woman." The man flushed. Boone sat beside her, quiet but solid. After a long pause, the man nodded and left. Boone didn't ask why she refused. Miriam said only, "I work for them, not you." Trouble came next in the shape of men. 3 riders appeared one evening just as the sun bled out. Their horses were lean. Their eyes leaned meaner. Boone watched them come up the rise, rifle on his knee. Miriam stood behind the screen door, arms folded. "Evenin'," one called. "You Boone Mercier." "I am." "We heard you've got a school here. Our boss ain't fond of that." Boone said nothing. The air thickened. "Our boss figures these kids should be working. Says book learnin' makes 'em lazy, puts ideas in their heads." Miriam stepped out. "Tell your boss to learn to read." That drew a laugh from the tallest one. The smallest one spat. "Reckon we'll come back, see how you're doin' in a week." They rode off without waiting for an answer. That night, Boone buried a shotgun under the porch and reinforced the windows. Miriam loaded bullets with trembling hands but didn't drop a one. They didn't speak of fear, but it was there, present in the way they moved close in the dark, shoulder to shoulder, each breath measured. They slept lightly, Boone's rifle across his lap, her knife in the folds of the blanket. The riders didn't return in a week. They came back in 4 days. This time there were 5. Boone saw them coming. He didn't wait. He walked down the path, rifle visible. Miriam stayed back. The children were gone, sent home that morning just in case. "Evenin', Mercier," the leader said, sneering. "Don't get off that horse," Boone said. "I think I will." He moved to dismount. Boone fired. The bullet struck the ground between the man's feet. Dirt sprayed his boots. His horse reared. "I told you," Boone said, voice cold enough to split bark. The man steadied his mount, eyes narrowing. "You shoot me, you'll hang. You step foot on my land again, and you won't be walking off it." A long silence followed, wind through dry weeds, a hawk circling overhead. "Let's go," the leader muttered. "Ain't worth the bullet." They left. Miriam came to stand beside Boone, both of them watching the dust settle. "You think they'll be back?" she asked. "Maybe not them, maybe others." "Then we get ready." They fortified the house, quiet and grim. Miriam moved the children's books to a hidden shelf under the floorboards. Boone stored jerky in tin pails in the root cellar. It became a rhythm: work, watch, wait, but the men didn't return. Rumor spread that Boone Mercier had killed 2 men in Kansas once and left their bodies for the wolves. Boone didn't confirm or deny. Miriam didn't laugh. By harvest, the first real harvest since she arrived, things began to shift. The land gave back, not much, but enough. Tomatoes, rough and bursting, beans that clung to the fence posts like they knew better than to fall. Miriam learned to cure meats. Boone carved a proper desk for the children. The ranch changed, grew, became something between a home and an outpost. One evening, a woman rode in from town, dragging her youngest behind her. She was missing 3 teeth and had a hand that trembled from drink. "I heard she teaches manners," the woman said. "I got no time for him." Miriam didn't hesitate. She opened the door. The boy stayed a month. He left with a book in his hand and a scar on his back he never spoke of. Miriam's back ached. Boone's knees stiffened in the cold, but they didn't speak of the ache or the age settling in. They spoke of work, of planting, of how to train a stubborn calf to stand in frost. And one night after dinner, Boone said, "You saved this place." Miriam shook her head. "No, I made it honest. It was always bleeding. I just showed it the wound." He watched her in the lantern light. The lines on her face deepened but not cruel. "You ever want more?" he asked. "More." "A town, a church, children of your own." She looked away. "I never wanted children until I saw what this world does to them. Now I do, but not like that, not helpless." Boone reached across the table, slow. "Would you raise one here?" "With me." She didn't speak for a long time. Then, "Only if they can ride, shoot, and read by 6. He smiled then, not often, not soft, but real. Miriam smiled back, and it felt like a victory. By the time the second autumn rolled in, the Mercier place had a name again. Children called it the Schoolhouse Ranch, and their parents, who'd once scoffed at Miriam's lessons, now came asking if she could teach handwriting to their daughters or temper to their sons. She agreed to neither outright, but told them, "I teach consequences. Whether you learn that from books or from silence is up to you." Boone built a second room onto the barn, not for animals, but benches. A chalkboard mounted on the wall, 3 oil lamps hung from beams, and windows cut square and simple. It wasn't a church, and it wasn't a schoolhouse, but it held its purpose better than either. Miriam taught 6 days a week, sometimes longer when storms stranded students overnight. Boone converted the hayloft into bunks. Children rolled themselves in quilts, listened to stories about prairie fires, about stars and soil, and the maps written in the land itself. She taught them that nothing owed them safety, that every kindness had to be earned. Still, she baked when she could. Boone watched her laugh more often now, though she laughed without softness. Her joy was edged with truth, earned through grit, not gifted. He told her once she looked younger than when she'd arrived. She answered, "That's what comes from using yourself proper." But peace never lasted long. One morning, Boone found a scrap of paper nailed to the post at the edge of their land. Rough handwriting unsigned, it said, "Stop poisoning minds, or we'll burn the lies down." He showed it to Miriam over coffee. She read it once, folded it, set it in the fire. "They spelled poisoning wrong," she said. Boone stared at the flame curling around the paper. "You want to stop?" "No." She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a pistol, small, worn, hammer-slick from oiling. "I taught the older ones how to shoot," she said. "With your old revolver. Figured it best if they could defend what they learn." He said nothing, just poured more coffee. A week later, the barn was set aflame. It burned quick, oil tossed in through the side slats, a torch pitched into the straw. The fire woke them with a howl. Boone was out the door with a bucket before his boots were on. Miriam was already hauling water from the pump, skirt hiked to her knees. They shouted till their throats tore. Flames climbed fast. The children's books burned, the chalkboard split and cracked, beams collapsed. Boone pushed Miriam back just before the roof fell. She didn't scream, didn't cry. Just stood there as the blaze lit her face, arms trembling from the buckets, fists clenched like stone. They didn't sleep that night. Boone paced the porch with his rifle. Miriam sat in a chair, staring into the dark where the prairie met the stars. Smoke curled around them. By morning, the fire was out and the barn a hollowed skeleton. That day, Boone rode into Demerick. He found the sheriff in the saloon, drunk and slurring about poker debts. Boone didn't ask permission. He dragged the man outside, slammed him against the rail, and said, "You find out who did it, or I start asking with my own hands." The sheriff didn't answer, blood on his lip. Boone let him go, mounted up, and rode back. Miriam had already cleared the ash by the time he returned. She stood with soot on her face, sleeves rolled, shovel in hand. "We rebuild," she said. "We make it stronger." Boone nodded. He called in favors. Lumber arrived from a neighbor 2 counties east. Nails, hammers, more chalk. Children came with their fathers. They raised new walls, higher this time, with a loft and stone supports. Miriam stood at the doorway each evening, watching it take shape, as if daring it to fall again. By winter, the schoolroom was finished. Better than before, insulated, lamp-warm, a new chalkboard gifted from a widow who'd heard the story. Boone carved the name M. Mercier into the doorframe, and when she saw it, she didn't smile. She said, "Now they'll know I never ran." That winter they took in a boy. He came crawling out of the snow, near-starved, boots worn to socks. Couldn't have been more than 7, wouldn't speak. Boone carried him in, and Miriam stripped his clothes off, warmed him with rags soaked in broth, whispering to him like a prayer she never said aloud. He didn't speak for 2 weeks. When he did, the first word he said was her name. She named him Isaac. They never asked where he came from. They knew. Boone built him a bed, and Miriam taught him letters by lamplight. At night, he clung to the blanket like it might vanish, flinching at every noise. Boone showed him how to mend fences, how to saddle a horse, how to stand his ground. Miriam taught him how to wield silence. One night, Isaac asked, "Are you my mother?" Miriam didn't answer right away. "No," she said, "but I won't let you be lost again." Boone found her later outside, sitting on the porch in the snow. She didn't hear him at first. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, but it wasn't a lie and wasn't the truth either. "I never wanted to mother anything," she said, "but I can't bury another child, not even one I didn't birth." He sat beside her. "You won't have to." And in that hush, beneath a sky black with frost, the weight they'd been carrying changed. Not gone. Not light, but shared. They stopped wearing grief like armor, started using it like a compass. Come spring, the boy would learn to shoot and read and build. He'd plant beans with her, ride fence with Boone, and grow into the kind of child who knew how to survive a fire, a winter, a world that didn't give second chances. And the wind that passed through the prairie didn't sound like mourning anymore. It sounded like warning. By the time Isaac turned 10, the land had learned to respect them. It wasn't peace, not in the soft way the Easterners spoke of it. But it was steadiness. The crops held, the cattle fattened through summer. The schoolhouse stood untouched through another winter. And the riders, the ones who'd threatened fire, who'd hated books and fearlessly whispered about putting bullets in heads, stopped coming altogether. Word had spread that the Mercier place was too well guarded, too well loved, too well armed. The boy had something to do with that. Isaac wasn't loud, wasn't sweet, but he was sharp. Took to shooting like a crow takes to watching the world for weakness. His penmanship was clean by 9. His mouth had never forgotten how to stay closed, but when he did speak, his words landed heavy. He carried Miriam's fire and Boone's silence. a creation of dirt and learning and hard-won shelter, and he knew it. That spring, the first daughter was born. Miriam nearly died again. Labor tore her raw, and Boone sat in the hallway listening to her scream until he thought he might lose what little softness he'd learned to keep. But when the sun broke open the sky, Miriam was still breathing, sweat cold on her brow, hands trembling. The girl was small, quiet, lungs thin but eyes strong. They named her Ruth, after no one, for the word alone. Boone built a cradle with cracked knuckles and no blueprint. Miriam rocked her slow, humming something without melody. Isaac watched from the corner of the room. He didn't ask if she was his sister. He just began setting his own share of chores aside for hers. By midsummer, Ruth smiled for the first time. Miriam didn't notice it until Boone told her. She didn't believe him at first. She's too new for smiling. She's not smiling at you. She's smiling at the wind. They both stood and watched her in the crib, little fists batting at air, gums bare, eyes squinting against the sun through the window. Boone reached out, took Miriam's hand. She's not afraid, he said. She hasn't been taught to be. But something about that smile, small and fierce and undeserved, cracked something deeper in Miriam than the fire or the famine or the girl she'd been when she stepped off the train with a hollow gut and too much pride. Later, after Ruth had fallen asleep, she stood in the field behind the house and looked toward the horizon. Not for danger, not for weather, just looking. Boone found her there. You thinking of leaving? No, she said. Just making sure there's still an edge to the world. He put his arm around her shoulders, not heavy, just enough. You ever think about what we are? She asked. What this is? Yeah, Boone said. A mistake that got stubborn. She smiled then. Only a little, but it was real. That fall, Isaac killed his first coyote, shot clean, skinned it proper. Miriam watched him from the porch, Ruth bundled in her arms, her cheek against the baby's head. He didn't even flinch, she said. He's ours, Boone said. Winter fell hard again, but it didn't scare them. The cellar was full. The barn roof didn't leak. The school ran all through December, kids wrapped in blankets, hands inked with lessons. A traveling preacher came once, tried to tell them what a proper family ought to be. Miriam offered him bread but no bed. He didn't stay long. Come the thaw, Boone's cough worsened. He'd carried it for years, but now it rattled deep. Still he worked the fence line, still saddled his own horse. One morning Isaac found him in the barn, sitting on the stool with blood on his lip and one hand gripping his ribs. Don't tell her, Boone said. She'll know. I know. They didn't speak of it after, but Miriam stopped letting him chop wood. Isaac started bringing in water without being asked. The house grew quieter, though nothing in it stopped moving. The last storm came in March. Wind that split the trees, rain like shot. Boone stood at the door and watched it come. Miriam lit the lamps. Isaac moved the animals to shelter. Ruth woke and cried, high and broken. That night the roof groaned above them, but it held. The next morning Boone didn't wake. Miriam found him cold, face calm. No blood, no pain, just gone. She didn't scream. She didn't cry until nightfall. Then she went into the field behind the house, alone, knelt in the dirt, and let the sounds come. Isaac buried him with steady hands. Ruth didn't understand. They carved a marker from cedar. Boone Mercier, 1849–1884. He made room for fire and didn't fear it. After that, Miriam didn't speak for 3 days. Then she rose, took Ruth in one arm, Isaac by the shoulder, and walked to the schoolhouse. Lit the lamp, opened the door, and taught, because she wasn't here for comfort. Because she knew the long work of carving out justice, of raising small fires into torches, of surviving as a defiance to men who said you couldn't. Because Boone hadn't saved her, he'd let her fight, and now she would fight for every inch of earth he left behind. The schoolhouse grew, the fence stretched wider. Ruth took her first steps in the field where her mother had once collapsed. Isaac began writing things down, slow but certain, like he was building a story that couldn't be erased. And sometimes, at dusk, Miriam sat on the porch and spoke aloud to the dust, to the fence posts, to the sky. Not prayers, not wishes. Just a single truth she wanted the world to remember. She came starving. He came hollow. And what they built from those ruins would never be burned.